Warning, the voices heard in this video are made synthetically using artificial intelligence. Nothing in this video reflects anything actually stated by the real-life individuals involved. This video is for entertainment purposes only, and serious political content will be avoided for that purpose. Enjoy!
Welcome everyone to the President's Play Dragon Age Origins.
Joe, you prehistoric bitch, we already did that a year ago. We are ranking all the weapons in Origins, which really doesn't make sense, since the weapons have tiers already in their description.
Well, just because they have tiers doesn't inherently mean they are all the same. You have to consider their stats too, which is why we will be ranking all unique weapons, since we would be here all day if we had to talk about every type of steel sword in the game.
All right, twist my nips, why don't you? Starting at the title screen was really confusing, but let's get it. How do we want to start this?
Well, we have a tier list here for every single weapon. So which one should we start with, boys?
Just go down the list, dumbass. It isn't that hard.
All right, well, it looks like you started us off with the unique origin weapons berries. So first here we have the family sword, which you get from the Human Noble Origin side quest.
Put that shit in S tier. There is nothing better to kill How with than this beauty.
Roleplay-wise, this sword is S tier to keep on you as a human noble, all game stats wise. This is the best early game weapon in the game. And by early game we mean until you finish Lothering, since it gives you +4 attack, 8.70 flat damage, with the modifier crit chance of 2.20% and armor pen of 2.30. For early game, this sword is S tier, but comparing it overall, I would give it a B tier since it doesn't have any rune slots, despite having really good stats.
You all are haters, but whatever B tier it is. I don't recognize this next weapon, though.
It's the borrowed longsword you get from Duncan during the City Elf origin. It's meant clearly just for the origin itself, its stats are all mid.
The sword itself deals 7 flat damage, a 2% crit chance, and 3 points of armor pen. It also gives an extra 6 attack for reference. Additional attack score helps you hit the enemy. It doesn't increase the damage of your swing, which means this sword is only slightly better than a stock iron sword. This is an easy D tier weapon.
Noble Origin remains peak, and next up we have the Fine Dwarven Crafts, direct from the Dwarf Noble Origin, the Fine Dwarven Blade. You get this from the loser Harrowmont if you tell him the truth about what happened with your brother Trian before you are exiled.
Another reason we should have elected him, bro, helps us kill Darkspawn more effectively.
Well, I don't know about that one, Joe. The sword deals 7.70 damage, 2.20% crit chance, and 2.30 armor pen. It also gives +2 attack, which is the lowest we have seen so far. I would put this slightly above the borrowed longsword in D tier. It really doesn't have much to offer.
Well, next up we have a weapon I am familiar with, the Blackened Heartwood Staff. You get this from the repository in the Mage Origin, and to keep it you need at least 1 point in coercion otherwise. Gregor takes it at the end of the origin.
For another reason, coercion stocks are overpowered. This is likely the best staff you will have in the early game. It deals 6 nature damage with the modifier 20 armor pen and gives an increased 2 spell power. If this staff didn't deal nature damage, which Darkspawn resists, this staff would be great for the entire game, but as is, it's only decent. I would still give it B tier. There are certainly worse staffs you can have, and for early game, I would give it the A tier.
Robe weapons are mid as always, except for Mommy Morrigan's Cold Staff next up. We have the Aeducan Mace, which you get at the end of the Dwarf Commoner Origin from Duncan, and it's not a sword, so it deals far less damage. Throw it in D tier.
Maces get gipped pretty hard in Origins, dealing less damage and offering higher armor pen instead. This mace deals 5.50 damage with an additional +2 damage to Darkspawn and has 0.8% crit chance while having an armor pen of 4.60. It also has the Messy Kills attribute, which has a chance of killing an enemy with an explosion like with the Walking Bomb spell. Overall, the damage to Darkspawn is nice, and since Darkspawn is the main thing you fight in the early game, I would at least put this mace in C tier.
It looks like that funny fruit you find in your mom's bedroom drawer, C tier, is appropriate also if you thought we were going to do the Dalish Elf unique weapon. So did we, but apparently there is no unique weapon in the entire Dalish origin, just standard elf gear. So let's move on to Sir Garland's sword, which you can steal from the elf messenger at Ostagar.
This sword is another reason why coercion skill stocks are important. If you don't have the family sword from Human Noble, this is likely the best one-handed sword you can get in the early game. It deals 7.70 damage and has a 2.20 chance to crit and has 2.30 armor pen. It also has a +2 to attack and 10 physical resistance, which is one of the only weapons to offer a defensive buff. So honestly, I would put this sword right next to the family sword in B tier. It's a solid weapon.
Put it right behind the family sword because that shit is peak. And next up we have a piece of shit two-hander which Barak tricked me into grabbing in the Korkari Wilds by doing the Missionary Quest automatic D tier weapon.
Donald, I know you hate two-handers, but they are by no means that bad. This sword deals 12 damage and has a crit chance of 2.65 thanks to its modifier and a 4.45 armor penetration as well thanks to the modifier on the sword. Also, the design is pretty cool. It looks kind of like a katana almost.
We're not ranking on designs, but for a two-hander build, this is a must-grab. It's going to be your most reliable weapon in the first couple hours of the game until you can buy something better or unlock the Dragon Bone Cleaver from the Witch Hunt. This is a solid B-tier weapon. Last up on the early game weapons, we have Oathkeeper, which you get from completing all side quests on the Lothering Chantry board.
For warriors, this is an essential early game weapon to grab either for yourself or Alistair. This weapon deals 8.40 damage, 2.40 crit chance, and 4 points of armor pen with the added bonuses the weapon provides. The weapon also has a healing increase, but the healing buff for every weapon is bugged in Origins, so for further reference, we won't be talking about them. The weapon also has a rune slot, which is amazing for this early in the game. I would give it our first A-tier slot.
POTUS used this sword for a while too. I can't argue with a tier here. Next up we have the Lightning Rod, which can be sold in Lothering or the Wonders of Thedas store in Denerim. It deals 4.40 electric damage, has 23 points of armor pen, and offers 10% electricity resistance and 10% electricity damage.
As we went over in the spell tier list, electric damage is kind of mid on its own since not many enemies are weak to it or resistant to it. This staff pairs well with Morrigan since she does have 1 or 2 electric spells at the start, so since it's available so early that prevents it from being D tier. I would place it somewhere in the middle of C tier.
Perfectly acceptable. No weapon a rogue could use can be top tier. Looks like we are not doing much better here with the Imperium crossbow. For those of you not familiar, you get this weapon by pickpocketing the Sigma merchant in Lothering who was upcharging people on goods like the hardworking businessman he is.
Crossbows are by their nature terrible in this game, but the Imperium crossbow is one of the 2 exceptions that are somewhat decent. First off, it is a tier 7 weapon you can get at the start of Lothering with only my girl Liana, no less. And it deals 12.80 damage, has a 3.20% crit chance and 11 armor pen, as well as dealing bonus damage to demons, which are a fairly common enemy type. Overall, I would give this a solid B tier. It makes a solid secondary weapon for most warriors, and is genuinely a reliable weapon for those moments you need a melee unit to kite.
B tier might be pushing it, but I guess since we are going to dumpster most other crossbows, we will give them this bone. Speaking of next up, we have the Sailor's Crossbow, which you can buy from Barlin in Lothering. But before I go into the stats, can I just point out even the Dragon Age wiki says to use the Imperium crossbow instead of this thing, and the only actual stat difference is this has the rapid aim statistic. So it fires faster. I'm going to throw this in D tier just from that note alone, unless anyone has some objections.
None
go off queen.
Sounds good, boys. Well, that does it for the last of the early game weapons, as every weapon we have going forward can be obtained at any time. So we will think about a typical late game build. When ranking these first up, we have the Veshial, the first axe, on our list. We can grab this from Bodan in camp for 131 gold, which is a lot of money, but as we saw in our own playthrough, by late game gold isn't hard to come by.
True, just focus on getting your bag up. This axe does 9.60 damage plus an additional 2 nature damage. It has a 6.60 crit chance with the weapon's melee crit modifier and 4 points of armor pen. In addition, it has +2 stamina regeneration in combat, a +2 increase to your strength stat, and an increased 10% backstab and crit damage, making it a versatile weapon, good for warriors and rogues. I think despite nature damage being somewhat useless against Darkspawn, the most common enemy type, this weapon is our first S-tier weapon. It is incredibly useful for most late-game builds, even if it isn't the definitive best weapon in the game.
S tier is solid. You can use this all game on Nightmare difficulty and be deadly, especially since it has 3 rune slots. Next up we have Sylvan's Mercy, a unique staff sold by Bodan for 8 gold.
The staff deals 5.20 nature damage and 29 armor pen. The staff also offers 5 spell power, 5% nature resistance, and 10% nature damage, which would be great if more than Stinging Swarm and Flying Swarm actually did nature damage in base Origins. But because of the State of Origin spells, this staff is one of the most useless staffs in the game, an easy D tier weapon.
D tier is where every rogue weapon belongs. Next up, we have a top tier weapon though, and that's Gorham's sword, sold by the dealer of fine dwarven crafts in Denerim himself. You can technically use this in the Origin, but since your items get taken, it's not fully usable until you buy it in Denerim for 3 gold.
This sword is as goated as the man himself. It deals 9.80 damage, has a 2.80% crit chance and 3.20 armor pen, as well as an additional +2 damage to Darkspawn. It's not the most deadly weapon against Darkspawn, but with 2 rune slots, and for only 3 gold, this can easily carry you well into the mid-game, which makes it a solid B-tier weapon.
B-tier is fair. It's a perfectly usable weapon. For the game next up, we have the engraved mace, which you can loot off Sir Landry in the Honorbound quest.
Yeah, which almost clapped you up in episode 4, if I remember right.
Eat a dick.
Obama. The mace itself is just okay. It deals 7.50 damage with the stat boost from the weapon, a 0.60 crit chance, and 6 points of armor pen. It also has a +1 dexterity and +5 mental resistance. Honestly, like most maces, this weapon is underwhelming as hell. I would put it somewhere in C tier, just for the stat buffs it gives.
Next up, we have some weapons that only appear in Bodan's improved stock that you get after completing 3 out of the 5 main quests, so this is the true late game items, and probably the last few you will get access to in this game. First up is the Meteor Sword, a 2-hander sword, which is sold at only 3 gold.
This sword deals 19.50 damage. With the stat buffs of the sword, it has a 2.25% crit chance and 5.25 points of armor pen, as well as an additional +2 strength. For how late in the game you get this sword, it's only just okay. I would place it somewhere around C tier.
C tier is fair for the trash 2-hander, but next up we have one of the few 2-hander weapons I can respect in this game, the Chasen Great Maul. It is sold with Gorham's improved stock at a massive 150 gold, so it's only for the true grind setters in the game.
The cost is well worth it, though, boasting a 19.40 damage with the weapon's stat boost 0.80 crit chance and 16.50 points of armor pen. It also has a +1 stamina regen in combat and adds 75 points of stamina to the person wielding it. This is one of the best weapons for a 2-handed berserker build, especially because it goes right through every armor in the game with that much armor pen. This is definitely a double S tier weapon, no doubt.
Oh, double S tier is perfect. You can make some really unique builds with this. Next up, we have a few staffs from the Wonders of Thetis. First off is Winter's Breath, sold for 31 gold. This staff deals 6.40 cold damage, 40 points of armor pen, as well as offering +10 spell power, 25% cold resistance, and +10% cold damage, which is the perfect weapon for a cold mage build.
Screw that. This is a perfect weapon for Mommy Morgan. Throw that shit in S tier, since there's no reason to never bring Mommy Morgan with you.
S tier is fair. We did use this staff until we got the other Winter's Breath later in the game. Next up, we have Torch of Embers, sold for about 7 gold, which deals 4.80 fire damage, as well as 26 armor pen and 6 spell power from the staff bonus, as well as a 10% increase to fire damage and fire resistance. This staff isn't as statistically powerful as Winter's Breath, but fire damage is universally useful against the 2 most common enemies, Darkspawn and Undead, so that makes this staff easy a tier.
Anything that improves Fireball is a good weapon to bring to a fight. But moving on from the lame robe weapons. Next up, we have Aod, which is dropped from Kristoff during the Pearls Before Swine quest given by Sergeant Kylon. It deals 9 damage plus 1 fire damage, 4.50% crit chance, and 3.50 armor pen, as well as 20% fire resistance and 2 rune slots. This weapon isn't as broken as Vertial, but it's free and a fairly solid weapon that I would put somewhere in A tier.
The fire damage and resistance really come in clutch against undead, and to protect against dragons a tier is a good place. Next up, we have a special case in Marjolaine's Recurve, which you get after completing Liliana's personal quest and can only be equipped by Liliana.
Don't you dare explain my girl's weapon. I will be the one to do it, Barry. This longbow does 12.60 damage with the weapon's modifier, 1.60 crit chance, and 8.80 points of armor pen. It also has a +3 cunning bonus and the rapid aim bonus. This is the perfect weapon for Liliana, dealing some of the best bow damage in base origins, and the cunning bonus helps out all of Liliana's damage and abilities too. An easy S tier for the best waifu in Dragon Age.
The basic bard will never be top tier, but her weapon is at least passable, unlike her. Next up, we have a classic Monty Python reference in Axameter. If you don't recognize this weapon, it's understandable. It's a very rare random encounter where we meet a group of villagers in awe at an axe stuck in a tree stump. There is a local legend that whoever can pull the axe out of the stump will become the next king or queen of Ferelden. And channeling our inner human noble, we oblige and yank it out ourselves.
This is far easier to accomplish than the Sword in the Stone from Fable 1. The axe itself is also one of the best weapons for mid-game. It deals 11 damage with the weapon stat bonus, has a 4.50% crit chance and 5.25 armor pen, as well as dealing +4 extra damage to dragons and a 10% increase in crit damage. It also has the lucky stat, which doesn't do anything but is cool all the same. Overall, I would give this axe the A tier. It's about on par with Aod, but far rarer to get.
The A tier is fair axes are only beat out by the longswords in this game, but next up, let's cover something not nearly as strong, the Liberator's mace, which we get from the Quartermaster in the Circle Tower for the low price of 1 gold.
Maces are trash, but let's go through it anyway. This mace deals 7 damage, has a 4% crit chance with the weapon's stat buff, and has 6.40 armor pen. The mace also gives 1 extra point of dexterity. Despite being a Templar weapon, this weapon is god-awful, throwing it straight into D tier.
Next up, we have a far stronger weapon, but one that is far more expensive, the Staff of the Magister Lord, which is sold by the same Quartermaster for a massive 128 gold, but also might win the title for best staff in the game.
Not even a joke, this staff deals 6.40 cold damage, has 40 armor pen, and offers a total of 13 bonus spell power with the staff's bonuses. The staff also gives +6 willpower, additional mana regeneration in and out of combat, and an additional 10% spirit and fire damage. If you're not running a specific cold damage build like, say, for Morrigan, this is without a doubt the best staff in the base game, and an easy double S tier for boosting 2 of the best spell damage types in the game.
Good mage glazing, as always, Sleepy. But now let's move on to a far more interesting topic, a rare two-hander W in Origins Usaris. This sword is earned through the side quest in the Circle Tower Watchguard of the Reaching, where you gather a bunch of notes, solve the statue puzzle, and kill a demon. Not to glaze up our series too hard, but we did the entire quest on episode 6 of our Origins series if you want a more detailed guide.
Good shout out, Donald. We have to keep up our grind somehow. Usaris boasts 16.50 damage, a 2.25% crit chance, and a 5.25 armor pen, as well as 20% fire resistance and 10+ damage to dragons. Fire resistance is really useful, as it's the second most common damage type after spirit. However, damage against dragon is rarely used, as there's probably only 5 or so fights in the base game where you actually have to fight dragons. This sword is perfect for fighting the high dragon fight, which is one of the most difficult fights in the game on Nightmare, which in my opinion earns this sword a solid A tier slot. Not to gush about the lore too much, but Usaris, being one of the 2 swords in the main title screen, also deserves a special shout out.
Believe me, viewers, if we had Barry say more about this sword, we would be here for the rest of the video. Moving on to another Circle Tower weapon, we have the Beastman's Dagger, which we can grab on the 4th floor right before meeting Cullen in a locked chest.
Like most daggers, the stats on these things are pretty simple. The dagger deals 5.60 damage, has a 4.20 crit chance, and 6.40 armor pen, as well as a 10% buff to crit and backstab damage. The backstab damage bonus really carries this weapon overall, so I would place it in A tier.
Beastman's is your go-to dagger until you get a Crow Dagger or Fang if you're a city elf. But if you're playing a dual-wield rogue in Origins, there is absolutely no substitute for this next weapon, the Rose's Thorn. This dagger is sold by Garen the Lyrium-addled merchant in the Orzammar Commons. This dagger deals 9.40 damage with the weapon's stat modifier, has a 10% crit chance with the weapon's modifier, and 8 points of armor pen. The dagger also gives you 2 dexterity health regen in and out of combat, and a grand total of 30% increased crit and backstab damage. Not even a romantic dinner date with Tegan would hit his heart. This dagger goes immediately into double S tier. The 148 gold is worth it.
All right, goddamn, that is a worthy weapon for double S tier, but Barry here needs a break to stop salivating and calm his rogue boner down. Next up, we have a far less impressive weapon, another crossbow, the Geared Recurve, which you can buy from Garen for 4 gold or earn this for free by killing the Dwarf Ambassador for the Crows.
This is a D tier bow like the rest of them, but for reference, this crossbow deals 12 damage, has a 3% crit chance, and 11.5 armor pen with the weapon's stat bonus. The bow also has an additional +4 attack, which we already said was pretty useless.
D tier is fair, but we have another goated weapon coming up, the Sword Ageless. You can grab this sword by doing the throne room plate puzzle in the Orzammar throne room and killing a hidden dragon. You can watch us complete the puzzle in episode 10 of our Origin series for reference, and it's important you grab this sword before crowning a king, otherwise you can't unleash the dragon or grab the sword as a result.
The sword deals 16.50 damage, has a 2.25% crit chance, and 5.25 points of armor pen. The sword also gives stamina regen in combat, additional 4 damage to Darkspawn in the Messy Kills feature. The sword does have a few glitches though, since the weakens nearby Darkspawn stat does nothing and the sword has no rune slots naturally, and you have to sell it to a merchant to exploit the Sword of Rune slots. Nevertheless, the fact you get this sword around the same time as recruiting Oberyn still makes it top tier, so I would give this weapon S tier, just for the Darkspawn damage increase alone.
All right, doing this tier list almost makes me want to take back my criticism of two-handers. There's some genuinely good choices in this game.
Wait, is that character growth coming from you, Donald? Can you finally stop hating two-handers?
Maybe if I wasn't tricked by you into grabbing one at the start of this series, but two-handers can still lick my nuts. Until Dragon Age 2, I'm just giving them an ounce of credit. Anyway, next up we have another dagger, so go off Rogue Main.
Well, moving on, then I guess next up we have the Thorn of the Dead Gods. You can get this by pickpocketing Lord Dace in the Diamond Quarter, or buying it in Lothering from Barlin. But the best tier is earned by looting the Drifter's cache in Caradon's Cross, so we will cover that version of the dagger, since it is the definitive best. You grab this by completing the Crosscut Drifter's quests in Caradon's Cross, which you can see in episode 10 of our series, if you need a guide. This dagger deals 9 damage with the weapon's stat bonus 4.50 crit damage and 10 points of armor pen. This dagger is really solid despite not giving backstab bonus damage. I would place it as low a tier. It's a solid second dagger choice to be paired with a thorn.
Next up in our Deep Roads Weapon Loot Fest, we have Bloodline, which you grab from the Corrupted Spider Queen in Orton Tig. The axe deals 8.40 damage, has a low 1.40% crit chance, and has 4.20 points of armor pen. The axe also gives +4 damage to Darkspawn, +3 dexterity, and 10% spirit resistance. This axe is all around perfect for killing Darkspawn. Even if it's not the most statistically impressive weapon, I would place it around B tier for all the stat buffs the weapon gives.
Next up, we have a few weapons from the Darkspawn Forge Master in the Dead Trenches. First up, we have Spear Thrower Tier 6 Long Bow. That deals 9 damage, has a 1.50% crit chance, 10.50 armor pen, with the bow stat buffs, and also offers rapid aim. For a free bow, this weapon is decent, but no matter if your archer is Lyanna or the Warden theirs, better choices, I would give this another B tier.
The other weapon the Forge Master drops is his hammer, a mid two-hander maul, which deals 12.60 damage, 0.70% crit chance, and 11.20 armor pen, as well as giving +6 attack and 25% fire resistance. The fire resistance is the only thing going for this weapon, being honest, and there is a better two-hander weapon in Ageless that you can get earlier in the Orzammar section. I would give this C tier just for the defensive buffs the hammer gives.
Well, next on the list here we have my personal favorite weapon in the game, and the sword POTUS himself used for the longest stretch of his journey Topsider's Honor. To get this sword, you have to find all of its pieces. Throughout your Deep Roads journey, there's 3 pieces scattered between Caradon's Cross, Orton Tig, and the Dead Trenches, respectively. And then once you bring all 3 pieces to the Warrior's Grave in Orton Tig, you will receive Topsider's Honor. The sword deals 11.20 damage, has a 3.20 crit chance, and 4 points of armor pen. The sword also gives you 20% spirit resistance, which is the most common damage type in the game, as well as +6 damage to undead. Combine this with 3 cold iron runes, and you have a true undead killing blade for the rest of the game. Undead are just as common as Darkspawn in this game, so this is a massively useful weapon and deserves double S tier.
I would argue, but seeing POTUS work with this blade should speak for itself. Next up we have Vanguard, which is Branka's signature weapon. The only way to get this mid-mace is by killing her in battle, which means siding with Caradon in the Anvil of the Void standoff, which is not worth losing the based big back golems.
If you do make the correct choice at the Anvil, though, this weapon isn't much of a reward for your troubles. It deals 7.50 damage, has a 0.75 crit chance, and 7 points of armor pen. The weapon gives you +3 strength and constitution, as well as stamina regen in combat. The stats are the only thing saving this thing from D tier. I would throw it in C tier.
C tier is fair, and now we get into our first diverging quest rewards, starting with Harrowmont's staff, which you get by crowning Harrowmont as king if you were loyal to him throughout the main story of Orzammar.
As much as I love my boy Harrowmont, this staff is a insult to mage players. The staff deals 4.80 electric damage, 26 armor pen points, and offers 1 magic point and 2 constitution points. As much as an honest ruler Harrowmont makes this staff as trash, throw it in D tier.
However, if you go with the correct choice of king, my grindsetter Balin, and remain loyal to him throughout the Orzammar questline, you get the far superior Trion's Maul. The Maul deals 13.50 damage, has a 0.75% crit chance, and has 12.25 armor pen points, as well as dealing +4 damage to Darkspawn. Easily S tier for AS tier king choice.
Okay, this is better than Harrowmont's staff, but besides the increased damage to Darkspawn, this is a mid as hell weapon and C tier at best. Don't go crazy now, Donald. Last up for the unique Dwarven weapons, we have the Dead Tide Shanker, which you get at the end of the Kadash Tide during Shale's companion quest. The Dead Tide Shanker deals 6 damage and has 4.50% crit chance and 7.5 armor pen with the weapon's stat bonus. The dagger also has +5 cunning, +6 attack, and interrupts spell casting. Next to the Rose's Thorn, this actually might be the second best dagger in the game thanks to how important cunning is for rogues. I would give this a solid S tier, especially for how easy it is to get this weapon.
Rogue mains might have less options, but almost all their options are really solid, unlike this next weapon for warriors here, Dwen's Sword. You can only grab this weapon if you kill Dwen. In Redcliffe, it deals 8.40 damage, has a 2.40% crit chance, and 2.60 points of armor. Pen the Sword also grants you 2% spell resistance and the Messy Kills buff. This sword is no better than Oathkeeper, which you can get much earlier, so this is an easy D tier weapon.
The base dwarves did not cook with this one, boys. Next up we have the Big Ball of Anxiety's weapon, Asala, which can only be equipped by Sten, and you receive this weapon in Dwyn's house after completing Sten's companion quest. The weapon deals 13.20 damage, has a 1.80 crit chance, and has 3.90 points of armor pen. The sword also gives you +1 willpower and a massive +12 attack, so it always hits. This might be a thematic choice for the big lug to use, but you could definitely do better in the two-hander department. I would give this a solid B tier just for being serviceable as a weapon.
The +12 attack is really thematic since this sword is Sten's soul, and he has a high level of experience and training with that weapon, making him more precise with it. That being said, while this weapon does everything you need, it leaves a lot to be desired. B tier is fair. Next up, we have the Green Blade, which we can get from Caitlyn's house in Redcliffe by passing a persuasion check with Bevan to get the key for the chest. There's a lot of choices we have concerning this sword as well.
The sword deals 9.10 damage, has a 2.60 crit chance, and 2.90 armor pen points. The sword also has 10% nature resistance and deals +6 damage to beasts. While the sword looks cool nature resistance isn't that useful, and damage to beasts is not useful either, since beasts are usually the weakest enemy type we fight in this game. I would give this C tier just because you can get the weapon early on and find some use for it. But it's far better to pretend to use it and give it back to Bevan so he can be a goated adventurer one day.
Next up we have a not-so-basic longbow, the Far Song, which you can buy from the new Redcliffe blacksmith for a massive 120 gold. You also have to kill Owen, or make Owen kill himself, by failing the quest Lost in the Castle to get this weapon, making it an ideal weapon for the true renegades among you.
This longbow is one of the rare top-tier rewards for an evil playthrough. Farsong deals 11.60 damage with the weapon's stat modifier, has a 4.60% crit chance with the weapon's modifier, and 8.80 points of armor pen. The weapon also has +10 attack, +10% increased crit damage, and the rapid aim buff. Despite the massive cost, this is the best bow in the entire game and easily a double S tier weapon. It's everything you could want for an archer.
Here's another longbow that's solid, but you don't have to be evil to get. The Mage's Eye. You can grab this bow from the village store in Haven on a locked chest. The bow deals 9.60 damage, has a 3.60% crit chance with the weapon's modifier, and has 8.80 points of armor pen. It also has a +4 attack. The weapon is pretty mid, but it's very easy to get if you go straight for it, and it's serviceable for the entire game. If it needs to be so, I would give it a solid B tier.
Yeah, for something being called Mage's Eye, though, you would think it harms spellcasters. Next up, we have a controversial weapon, Spell Weaver, which you can get from the cultist overseer deep in the ruined temple dungeon. The sword deals 10.50 damage, has a 3% crit chance, and 3.50 points of armor pen. The sword also gives +5 magic, has mana regeneration out of combat, gives +3 electricity damage, and 10% spell resistance. All of the stats are really solid, but what do you boys think?
I think if we put it lower than S tier Arcane Warrior mains are going to find out where we live. The reason this sword is controversial is only an Arcane Warrior can wield this sword, and it's supposed to be able to cast spells while equipping it, but only certain spells can be cast with this equipped. Many others will cause you to sheath the sword, significantly lowering your DPS overall. The damage of this sword is solid, but there are far better weapons you could use overall. I would still put it in S tier for being tied to one of the strongest specializations in the game.
Put that shit in D tier. Mages are lame enough. This just takes away the one useful thing they do, which is casting spells.
Okay, Donald Wizard Money Gang Cope Harder. If this sword was able to cast every spell without having to sheath the sword, it would be double S tier. I think as it is, it's a very high a tier weapon, though I already know people in the comments are going to roast us.
You got to do what you have to. The truth hurts Obama. Next up, we have Faith's Edge, which we only get by killing the cult leader Colgrim during the Urn of Sacred Ashes quest. This means you can't get access to the Dragon Chug Jug, which isn't worth it to true renegades, but I suppose not everyone can be based. The axe deals 15 points of damage, has a crit chance of 4.50%, and armor pen of 5.25. It also gives +2 willpower and has a 5% crit damage buff. This is decent and it's unique looking axe, but there's far better two-handers you can get and far quicker too. I would give this axe a B tier. It's serviceable, but nothing more.
I think B tier is going to be our most used slot, and coming up we have another contender for B tier, the Madashir War Axe. The axe deals 16 points of damage with the weapon's stat buff, has a 9.50% crit chance with the stat modifier, and 5.25 points of armor pen, as well as -1 to dexterity. Honestly, considering you can get this at the same time as Faith's Edge, and the only difference is increased damage and crit chance at the cost of dexterity, I would say this is dead, even with Faith's Edge at B tier.
Next up, we have a more obscure, unique Dagon's Dale Thanu, which you can steal or loot from Dagon when he is unconscious or killed in the Brazilian forest. The axe deals 7.80 damage, has a 1.30% crit chance, and has 2.90 points of armor pen. It also has +4 attack and 10% nature resistance. The axe looks unique, but the stats are very mid. I would give this D tier. There's a lot better axes you can get far earlier.
Next up, we have the Bow Wolf Killer, which you can get by giving Varathorn the Iron Bark and asking for the bow. The bow deals 8.40 damage, has a 1.40% crit chance, and has 7.20 armor pen points. The bow also deals +4 damage to undead and +8 damage to beasts. This bow is fantastic for the Dalish Elf main quest, where those are the two main enemies you fight, but otherwise there's far better bows you can get. I would give it C tier since it's strong for one part of the game, and that's it.
Moving on to another longbow, we have Falan Din's Reach, which you can get from the Dragon Horde in the Brazilian ruins. The bow deals 11.60 damage with the weapon's modifier, has a 1.60% crit chance, and deals 8.80 points of armor pen, and has the rapid aim buff. Honestly, for how easy it is to get this weapon, it's really good. Maybe not as solid as Marjolaine's Recurve or Farsong, but it's still a great weapon. Because of the high damage and rapid aim, I would give it a tier.
The A tier is a little high, but this does give you everything you need in a ranged weapon. Next up, we have the Oak Branch, which you get from the Grand Oak by either giving his acorn back or killing him. The staff deals 5.20 nature damage, has 29 armor pen, gives +4 spell power, as well as 2 points of constitution, 1 point of magic, and a 10% nature damage buff. Again, nature damage only affects 2 spells in base origins, and you can do far better for far less, so this is an automatic D tier.
The mid-mages keep taking L's. Next up, we have the Magister's Staff, which we get by killing Zathrin either after slaying Witherfang or by choosing to execute the entire Dalish camp if you want the big back werewolf army on your side like me. The staff deals 6 fire damage, has 35 armor pen points, gives a +11 spell power, and has mana regeneration in combat, as well as 10% spirit damage bonus. Honestly, I would give this a solid A tier as staffs go. There are better weapons, but spirit damage and fire damage are the best damage types in the game, so this seems good for the robes or Mommy Morrigan.
It's a solid weapon wielded by a shitty mage. Next up, we have a two-handed Axe Griffin's Beak, which is a weapon you can get by siding with Zathrin and killing the Lady of the Forest and then asking him for a reward. The axe deals 15 damage and has a 4.40% crit chance and 5.25 armor pen, as well as dealing +4 damage to Darkspawn. The axe also can only be equipped by a Grey Warden, so for the base game, that means only your Warden Alistair or Loghain, but considering both are built as a sword and shield tank, that means this weapon is really only useful for your Grey Warden. You also have to side with Zathrin, which is a somewhat evil choice. What are we thinking, boys? B tier.
Normally I would be on board with B tier since the sword is a worse ageless. However, it should be noted you can pair Griffin's Beak with Griffin's Helm from the Denerim Grey Warden cache. Then your Warden can become immune to backstab damage. This is very late in the game, but for a late game build I would say this works rather well. I would put it in a tier just for that combo.
A tier is glazing, but for the true game knowledge nerds among you, I will allow you to pop off. Next up, we have the DLC items, starting off with Olaf's prized cheese knife, which you can get from Olaf's chest in Hanleith. The dagger deals 5.60 damage, has a 4.20 crit chance percentage, and 7.40 armor pen with the dagger's stat buff. This dagger is great for how easy it is to get, but we have already covered a lot better weapons. So I would give this B tier for just being serviceable for rogues.
B tier is fair. I'm glad we had someone other than Barry to cover the daggers to stop the salivating. Next up, we have Wilhelm's Magus Staff, which you can get from siding with Kitty and letting her possess Amelia. The staff deals 4 points 40 physical damage, 23 points of armor pen. The staff also gives +3 willpower, 25% fire resistance, and a 10% boost to fire and electric damage. For an evil decision, this is a pretty trash reward. The only thing saving this staff from D tier is the stat bonuses it gives. This is a basic C tier weapon.
Well, that covers the Stone Prisoner. Next up, we have the Warden's Keep unique weapons, starting off with the Antique Warden Crossbow. You can get this at several tiers, but you can upgrade it to the highest tier by selling it to Levi and buying it back after leaving the area. So we will go over the Tier 7 stats. The crossbow deals 13.80 damage, with the weapon's increased stats. It deals 3.20% crit chance and deals 11 points of armor pen, as well as having the rapid aim buff. Because it has the highest crossbow damage in the game, with the rapid aim buff, this can easily go in a tier for a good secondary weapon for your squad's warrior.
The only other crossbow that is saving the entire weapon line from being beyond trash. Next up, we have the copy of Winter's Breath that you get from the Rage Demon boss in Soldier's Peak. This staff is identical in stats to the other Winter's Breath, with the only difference being a 15% increase in cold damage instead of 10% cold damage. On Mommy Morrigan, this is double S tier, but in general, I would give this staff S tier because of how amazing cold damage spells are, as we covered in our spell tier list.
We know you're only giving it S tier because Morrigan uses it, but next up we have Asturian's Might, which can be at any tier. But like other Warden's Keep weapons, can be upgraded by selling it at Leva's shop, so we will go over the highest tier the weapon has. The sword deals 12.50 damage with the sword stat bonus, has a 3% crit chance, and gives 4.50 armor pen with the weapon's bonus. The weapon has the weakened Darkspawn enchantment, but as we already covered, it doesn't work in game. Overall, though, the sword's basic but deals pretty good damage if you upgrade it, so I would give it a solid B tier. There's better weapons, but this can carry you through the game if you want it.
All right, and here comes the weapon that barely needs an introduction, Star Fang. You get this weapon by finding the meteor ore in a random encounter, and then bringing it to Mikal Dryden in Soldier's Peak after finishing the Warden's Keep quest. You can either have him make you a great sword or a long sword, so we will cover the stats of both. First off, the long sword variant deals 14.90 damage with the weapon's stat buffs. It has a 3.40% crit chance and a 6.70 armor pen with the stat buffs as well. It also gives you a +3 dexterity bonus. No real contest here for double S tier. There's no better longsword to get in base Origins.
As for the Great Sword variant, the weapon deals 18.70 damage, has a 2.55% crit chance, and has 8.80 points of armor pen, as well as 8+ attack and +3 strength. This weapon has the highest damage in the game of any other weapon, so it's another easy double S tier.
Last for the DLC items, we have the weapons. From Return to Ostagar first on the list, we have Merrick's Blade, which you get from Kalian's chest during the main quest of the DLC. Just like Warden's Keep, the sword can be upgraded later, so let's cover the best tier available. The longsword deals 11.20 damage, has a 3.20% crit chance and 4 points of armor pen. The sword also gives you stamina and health regen in combat and deals +6 damage to Darkspawn. This would already be S tier on its own, but why don't you go over why it is double S tier, Barry?
Gladly so. With Kalian's shield equipped, you get a set bonus Kalian's Arms, which gives you an extra 5 damage and an extra 5 stamina regen in combat, which makes this sword even stronger than Starfang's longsword. So this is another easy double S tier weapon, thanks to the set bonus.
Return to Ostagar, proving why it's a glorified loot fest with the first weapon. And next up, we have Duncan's Sword, which you can loot from the final boss of Ostagar, the Risen Ogre that Duncan killed, which deals at the highest tier 11.20 damage, has a 3.20 crit chance and 4 points of armor pen, as well as giving +3 willpower and cunning, +4 damage to Darkspawn and stamina regeneration in combat. The sword isn't as blatantly overpowered as the last two we covered, but it's still a decent weapon. I would place it in S tier.
S tier is fair. The cunning buff could be good for a dual wield warrior or rogue. Next up, we have Duncan's Dagger. which again you can loot from the Risen Ogre, and at its highest tier it deals 6.40 damage, has a 4.80% crit chance and 8 points of armor pen, as well as giving +4 dexterity at 10% damage and +10 damage to dragons. This is an easy S tier dagger thanks to the massive dexterity and backstab damage bonus.
It's easy to see how Duncan killed an ogre in 10 seconds flat now. Next we have the Nub Crusher, which you can loot in the weapon stand in the Tower of Ishal the Maul, deals 14.40 damage, has a 0.80% crit chance, and deals 14 points of armor pen. The Maul also has 4 dexterity and gives 100 points of stamina and a chance to stun. This is great stats, but is otherwise pretty average, so I would shove this in B tier.
Wait, what the hell is this staff? I don't recognize this next one. Is it a mod?
No, Donald, it's the staff in the mage's chest in Ostagar if you don't loot it during the prologue section. Then the staff becomes blighted and more powerful. Corrupted Magister's staff deals 5.60 physical damage and has 32 points of armor pen, as well as +10 spell power and 15% spirit damage and 5% chance to cause paralysis on the target. Considering how early you can get this staff and the massive bonus spirit damage it offers, I would place this around low a tier.
A tier is fine, and of course our resident dementia victim is the only one who knows what happens if you forget to loot the mage's chest in Ostagar. Next up, we have a literal piece of wood that you can ask your good boy Barkspawn to find at any time in the game. The staff deals 5.20 physical damage, deals 29 armor pen, and gives 1 constitution point and 10 nature resistance. The most unique thing about this weapon is that you don't have to be a mage to use it. Anyone can equip it. And since you can get it as early as Loithering, I would say the stats make it C tier at least.
Well, last up before the endgame items, we have the Keening Blade, which you get by killing Gax Kang in the quaint hovel in Denerim by finding 3 adventurers' notes in Tapster's Tavern, the Elven Ruins, and Urn of Sacred Ashes. The Keening Blade deals 11.20 damage, has 3.20% crit chance and 6 points of armor pen, as well as dealing +3 cold damage and has +6 attack. This was the final sword POTUS used in our playthrough, and I would give this a solid double S tier weapon. It's not as strong as Starfang or Kalian's sword, but it is one of the strongest swords in the game.
All right, last up we have the late game items that you can only get after finishing the main quest up to the Landsmeet, so we have to rank these as final build items as a result. First up we have the Bite Back Axe, which Errol Howe drops on his body. The axe deals 9 damage, has a 1.50% crit chance and 5 points of armor pen, as well as 15% crit damage. This is a solid weapon for a dual wield build, but by this late in the game you should have stronger options. If you're rushing through the game, this is okayed, though would give it a solid B tier.
That bitch's weapon doesn't even deserve anything higher than D tier, but I'm going to headcanon how just stole the axe from somewhere. Next up, we have the Summer Sword, which you get from killing Sir Cawther. In the race. No, I'm never going back to prison. In the daughter, hey, star arts.
Damn, 2 months later and Donald is still traumatized from that fight.
Don't worry, Joe, I'm already ordering him some fish delights on DoorDash, so I will go ahead and describe the sword for our viewers. The sword deals 16.50 damage, 2.25% crit chance, and 5.25 armor pen, as well as +20 physical resistance and a higher chance to knock targets back. This sword is great and looks amazing, but by this late in the game you should have Starfang or the Chasen Maul from Gorm by this point, and the Summer Sword is not on their level, so I would give this a tier. Donald, look, the fish sandwiches are on their way. Are you good?
Oh shit, where am I? Thanks for the food though, Barack. I was feeling empty and scared there for some reason. Anyways, next up we have a few weapons here from the Grey Warden Vault in the Denerim warehouse. First up we have the Axe of the Grey, which deals 9 damage, has 4.50 crit chance, and has 5.50 armor pen. It also deals +6 damage to Darkspawn. This is a decent sword, but for this late in the game, it's only just okay. So just like the Summer Sword, I would give it A tier.
A lot of these final weapons aren't as strong as they first look, boys. Next up, we have the High Constable's Mace, also in the Grey Warden Vault, which deals 7.50 damage, has a 0.75% crit chance, and deals 7 armor pen. It also has stamina regen in combat and +6 damage against Darkspawn. This is decent, but it's a late game mace, so I can't really put this higher than C tier.
This video could just be titled the Bashing Mace video, being honest, but moving on next we have the Longbow of the Golden Sun, which you get from killing the Elf Devera in the Tevinter warehouse. The Longbow deals 9 damage, has 1.50% crit chance, and deals 8 armor pen, as well as gives +4 attack. This is decent, but it's no far song. A recurve, I would give this a flat C tier since it doesn't really offer much compared to a normal tier 7 longbow.
Next up, we have the gift of the gray, which we get from Valendrian if we save him from the Tevinter slavers. This is Duncan's other dagger, but it doesn't have any interaction with the dagger we get from Ostagar. The dagger deals 6 damage and has 9.50% crit chance with the weapon stat bonus and 7 points of armor pen. This is probably the most mid of the late game weapons and really doesn't deserve to be associated with Duncan, so this is nothing but C tier fodder.
If you're a city elf warden, you save your father instead of the elder and are gifted with Fang. The dagger deals 5.20 damage, has a 3.90% crit chance and 5.80 armor pen. The dagger also gives +6 attack and +6 damage to beasts. The dagger does have much stronger stats on console for some reason, so if you're playing on console, this is an easy S tier, but as it is, this is just a C tier dagger.
I take back my early praise. This is a disappointing late game origin reward, but I guess console players have to get something. Next up, we have the Staff of the Ephemeral Order, which you can get from Alarith in the Elven Aelinage store for 18 gold. The staff deals 6 physical damage, has 35 armor pen, as well as 3+ willpower and +5% spirit damage. This staff, like many others, is fairly mid, especially for this late, so I would place it somewhere in C tier.
The second to last base origin weapon is Heaven's Wrath, which you can buy from Bodin at Redcliffe Castle before the final battle for 20 gold. The staff deals 6 electric damage and has 35 armor pen as well as 11 spell power. The staff also has mana regeneration in combat and a 10% increase to electricity damage. This is a pretty mid staff, honestly.
If you don't have a tier 7 staff for one of your mages by this point, this one isn't bad. It gives you high spell power and mana regen, but electricity is fairly mid, so I would give it a solid B tier.
That's definitely farewell. The last weapon before we reach the Awakening Gear is the Malign Staff, which we can get from the Hurlock General in the Alien Age during the final battle. The staff deals 5.20 physical damage and 29 points of armor pen. It also offers 9 spell power, mana regeneration in combat, and a 10% increase in spirit and electricity damage, all at the cost of 1 willpower. This is a damn disappointing staff for how late you get it, honestly.
This is a staff you get from Temu. I don't see a reason you would use this as late in the game as you get it unless you're doing a challenge run. It's a definite D tier, and thank God for Awakening, because otherwise we would be ending this video on a depressing note. First, on the Awakening weapons, we have the Voice of Velvet, which is a dagger you can buy from the bartender in Amaranthian for a massive 174 gold. The dagger deals 10.20 damage with the weapons modifier, has a crit chance of 10.40%, and has 10 points of armor pen.
The dagger also gives health regen in combat, a 25% increase to dodge chance, a 100% increase to crit damage, and +5 cold damage. The price is steep, but this is without a doubt the best dagger in the game, and easy double S tier off the bat.
Double S tier off the bat as Crazy Awakening is about to pop off. Next up, we have the last crossbow on our list, Longshot, which can be purchased from Glassrick and Amaranthine for 94 gold. The crossbow deals 24.40 damage, has an 18.60% crit chance, and 13.75 points of armor pen. The bow also has rapid aim and +10 attack. Even though this is a crossbow, it has absolutely top-tier damage, but it's still outclassed by several other weapons in Awakening. I would give this a solid S tier. If you have extra money, it doesn't hurt to get this, but you can do better.
They honestly tried their damnedest to make crossbows based with that one. Next up, we have another longbow we can buy from the bartender in Amaranthian for 9 gold, the Longbow Misery. The longbow deals 10.80 damage, has 11.80% crit chance with the weapons modifier, and has 13.50 armor pen. The longbow also has rapid aim and +10 attack. If this was in base Origins, this would be amazing, but since it's in late game and Awakening, I can't justify giving this weapon more than a B tier.
If you want misery, just play Veilguard. But speaking of emotions, we have another edgy weapon name here in the form of Frenzy. We can either buy this from Glassrick and Amaranthine for 12 gold, or get a free axe from the Shrine of Korth in the Keep. The axe deals 20.30 damage, has a 5% crit chance, and has 6.75 points of armor pen. The axe also has health regeneration in combat, 10% spell resistance, and +10 attack. This is the perfect two-hander for a base dwarf, but there are still stronger weapons. I would give this axe a solid A tier.
The A tier is fair since it's so easy to get. Here we have another weapon that's going to cost at least half a Bitcoin to get Spell Fury. You can get this from Octane the grocer in Amaranthine for 172 gold. The staff deals 7.20 physical damage, has 50 points of armor pen, and gives 29 spell power with the weapon bonuses. The staff also has a +4 to all attributes mana regen and regen in combat and the rapid aim buff. This is easily the strongest staff in the game from the spell power boost alone and is an easy double S tier.
Giving +4 to all attributes is better than the robes deserve. Next up, we have the bow powered by pure racism itself, Dragon Spite. You can get this bow from the Silverite mine by solving the Architect's Lab puzzle, which you can watch in episode 2 of our Awakening series for reference. The bow deals 12.50 damage with the weapon modifier, has a 1.70% crit chance, and has 7.50 armor pen. The bow also has +10 attack the rapid aim and reduced hostility buff, and a massive +20 damage to dragons. The bow is perfect for the dungeon, you can unlock it in, but after that there's better options for you. I would give this a solid B tier.
We have a few more bows to get through for all the archer mains out there. Awakening certainly lets you eat good. Next up is the Heartwood bow, which you can have Wade make by using Heartwood looted from the Ancient Sylvan. The Heartwood bow deals 15.80 damage, has a 6.8% crit chance, and has 11 points of armor pen.
The longbow also has +5 dexterity and cunning +6 attack and the rapid aim buff. This isn't as top tier as the Heartwood shield that our goat POTUS wears, but it's still the perfect longbow to use in game, and is an absolute double S tier weapon.
Next up, let's give our goat Nathaniel love with the Howe bow, which we can give to Nathaniel as a gift by finding it in the Vigils, Keep Basement, in the Howe Crypt. The bow deals 13.80 damage, has a 6.80% crit chance, and 11 points of armor pen. The weapon also has +4 attack and the rapid aim buff. Even if it's exclusive to my boy Nathaniel, this bow is everything you could ask for a top-tier bow. The only better bow is the Heartwood bow, so I would place this as a S-tier weapon.
The lore breaks aside, the Howe longbow is top tier. Next up we have the Staff of the Lost, which we get in Kal Hirol by defeating the Lost in the Lava Golem. The staff deals 7.20 physical damage, has 50 points of armor pen, has an additional 24 spell power. The staff also gives +10 magic +75 mana, a 15% increase in spirit resistance, and a massive 50% increase in spirit damage.
Overall, the staff is slightly weaker than Spell Fury, but the massive increase to spirit damage still makes this incredibly powerful, since spirit damage is the most typical damage for spells. I would give this staff a solid S tier.
Well, with Mommy Valana and Anders' primary weapons covered, let's go into the last few weapons here. Next up, we have the Mother's Chosen, which we loot off the King of Crash Outs the First. The sword deals 18.70 damage, has a 2.55 crit chance, and has 7.75 points of armor pen. The sword also gives +2 cunning, +4 attack, and +5 fire damage. It's not the strongest two-hander, but it's certainly a contender, especially with the natural +5 fire damage and easy S-tier weapon.
This sword is terrific for undead and darkspawn. Coincidentally, it's perfect for most sections of the game. Next up we have Sir Alvard's sword, which we can either get as a random drop from the Avar Lord boss in the crypt, or we can find the sword behind the Baroness's manor after defeating the Baroness and unlocking the dock gate. The sword deals 17.60 damage, has a 2.40% crit chance, and gives 6 points of armor pen. The sword also gives you 20% fire resistance, has a 50% chance to ignite the target. It gives +10 attack and has +3 fire damage. Overall, while not as strong as the Mother's Chosen, it's still a very solid weapon. I would give it an easy A tier.
Well, next on the list here we have two blades everyone recognizes, so in the interest of edging the viewers, let's talk about the last weapon you can get in Awakening Flimis Broomstick.
Devious work, Joe.
You can get the broomstick from one of the Darkspawn generals in the Smuggler's Cove while defending Amaranthine. The staff deals 6.40 nature damage, has 40 points of armor pen, gives 17 additional spell power, and has an additional 10% nature damage. The staff causes a lot of lore confusion as to why a Darkspawn would have Flimis Broomstick, but it's probably best not to question it, and try defying gravity by putting it in C tier.
Joe, did you really just make a wicked reference? We are going to shelf that for now and move on to Vigilance. Just like Starfang, you can have this sword made for you by Wade by bringing the ancient dragon bone to him after defeating the Queen of the Black Marsh. Now here's where things get tricky. This sword's stats are insane, but there are literally 8 different variants of the longsword and 8 additional variants for the greatsword. And while I know everyone wants to hear about this sword all day, I think we need a different solution in the interest of time.
Look, let's be real. Both versions of this weapon are double S tier. No matter what variant you craft, it's the strongest weapon in the game, no contest. The version that works best for you depends on the build you have been using so far. But personally, I recommend getting as much fire damage on that thing as possible to kill all the darkspawn you're about to face. And how the hell did we not end on that note? Why are there still weapons to cover on this list?
Barry was making a fuss about the DLC items, so he said we should cover them last apparently, so go off Queen.
Thank you, Joe. So the DLC items are all top tier, and I want to go over their stats, but I wanted to make the claim that they don't necessarily belong in double S tier. For every other weapon, you have to lay down a massive amount of gold or do a quest to receive, but the DLC items you get at the start of every playthrough are essentially like New Game Plus items. So I wanted to make a new tier between double S tier and S tier that is just cheat tier. There is nothing wrong with using them, by the way, hell, we use them too, but I just think they should be ranked differently.
All right, sure thing, nerd. Let's finish this last stretch strong. First up here, we have Blightblood, which you get from completing the Darkspawn Chronicles DLC, which is not an easy task considering the mental anguish that expansion causes. If you do, however, you get a sword that deals 11.20 damage, has a 6.20% crit chance with the modifier, and gives 4 points of armor pen. The sword also gives +2 attack, gives +10% crit damage, and also has the poison buff. This almost makes Darkspawn Chronicles worth it, boys.
The weapon has improved stats when you bring it to Awakening, but it would still get the same ranking, so we are just going to cover the Origins versions of each weapon. Next up, we have the Reaper's Cudgel, which we get from killing the Harvester on Hard or Nightmare difficulty. The mace deals 12 points of damage with the modifier, has a 0.80% crit chance, and has 8 points of armor pen. The weapon also gives you +1 armor, +4 strength, and a 10% chance to knock back enemies. The weapon's main appeal is the fact you can sell it for around 300 to 600 gold, which is easily enough to fully deck out your main party, which is a massive cheat to any playthrough.
Next up, we have the Sorrows of Arlafin, which you can get by completing the Scrying Ritual during the Witch Hunt DLC. The longbow deals 12.60 damage with the weapon modifier, has a 7.60% crit chance with the weapon modifier. The longbow also gives 11.80 points of armor pen and the rapid aim buff. This longbow is only outclassed by Marjolaine's Recurve in the Far Song, so it's an easy cheat weapon.
Last weapon to go, boys. Let's finish strong with the Dragonbone Cleaver, which you get from killing the Vardaral during the Witch Hunt DLC. The Great Axe deals 21 damage with the modifier, has a 4.80% crit chance, and gives 6 points of armor pen. The weapon also gives 8 willpower and a 10% increase in critical damage. If you don't get Starfang, this is the strongest two-hander weapon you can get in Origins, making it an easy cheat tier, and with that, we did it, boys. Every weapon in Dragon Age Origins ranked.
Feels good to talk about Origins again. I can't lie, I did miss this game even if it's only been a few weeks. Well, viewers, don't worry, we do have a few more tier lists on Origins we have planned on in the future. So if you're just here for the tier list, we got you. As for those of you who just love seeing content with the boys My Maiden Voyage and Vilgard will come out next week. And after that, we will be going back to Dead Space, so look forward to the content.
But for now, as always, stay safe. Obama out.